any item that's not on the agenda. Right before the meeting, we received a written correspondence. This is correspondence related to Measure S, so I think it fits under this item, and we'll refer this inquiry to staff. And other than that, are there any comment for this board on items that's not on today's agenda?
Madam Chair, I believe I have 8 participants that have their hand raised, so I'm assuming that they want to speak on public comment.
Okay, so
the first one is Kewin Vong.
Okay, it's a Mr. or Mrs. Vong?
Hi, my name's, yes, this is she?
Yes.
Yes,
Please.
I would like, sorry, ma'am.
Please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to read a statement of Angel Ha when regarding item 2.5. Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. Statement of Angel Ha when I have lived with my children and my parents at 1832 Welch Avenue in Rock Spring for 8 years. I was at work when 3 feet of floodwater entered our home in 2017. The police evacuated my mom and my children, but didn't let me come in. We lost everything on the ground floor. It took almost $10,000 to fix and clean up the car. It smelled and did not work properly for a long, long time. Because my mom got off work at 10 p.m., we couldn't stay at a shelter because the doors were locked at 10 p.m. Instead, we stayed with friends for 2 months. When we returned to our apartment, it had a bad odor, lacked water and power, and our rent went from $1,750 to $2,500 a month. But we cannot afford to live anywhere else. We are stuck. So for 4 months after the flood, we had to eat out a lot. So we wouldn't be a burden on our friends, because even when we moved back to our apartment, there was no way to cook. So that was another burden. Also, due to all the disruption, I missed 4 weeks of work at my $12 an hour sorter job, and my mom lost 2 weeks of wages at Tamarind Restaurant. I heard that you were thinking about building some flood protections in Rock Springs many, many years ago, but you did not do it because the Army Corps of Engineers did not think that it was worth spending money to help poor people. Is that why you didn't help us when you knew that we were in a dangerous floodplain? We are glad you're finally putting in a flood barrier, but why didn't you do so when it could have prevented all this harm? We have been waiting now for over 3.5 years to recover our losses. I know that you have paid many of our neighbors, but what about us? Why won't you pay us the compensation we deserve? Please do so promptly. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Michelle?
Okay. The next speaker is Gary Johnson.
Mr. Gary Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the time to come and speak before you. My name is Gary Johnson, and I live at 380 South 20th Street, and I lived there on February the 21st, the day of the flood in 2017. I have been living in this community since 2008, and I own my own home. I live with my husband, our dog, and our son. Before 2017, I really enjoyed this neighborhood. We had block parties. Our neighbors all looked out for each other. We had a community watch program, but the flood really destroyed a lot. The night of the flood, I received a text message from one of my neighbors saying, "I think your house is about to get flooded." I had already been home in the afternoon, and I was assured by the water district people that I talked to at Coyote Creek that the flood would not come anywhere near my house on 20th Street. But 2.5 hours later, the water was at my doorstep. All I had was enough time to pick up my 3 dogs and my passport and my medication before the water was inside my home. I walked through the filthy water, which was contaminated with all kinds of toxins, and I carried the dogs and the passports and my medications out to my car, which was parked over on McLaughlin Street. I went over to a friend's house, dropped off the dogs. My husband met me there. We walked back through the hip-waist water, which was now flooding our house. And inside, we moved as many things as we could up to higher shelves. We packed a few belongings that had not been already damaged by the flood. We carried them above our heads in the flood water and back out to safety. We lived with our friends for the next 5 months with our dogs, and we watched in horror as our house was torn apart right down to the beams. The mold, the rot the flood had caused on a 100-year home was irreversible. I have a new house now because I have paid for it to be rebuilt. But that's not the house that I want. I want my old house. It's 100 years old. It has heritage in San Jose. But it's not that house. It's a new house. It's a new house that I had to build. My insurance paid for about half, but it did not pay for everything. And I want to be compensated. And I don't understand why 3 years ago, when this happened, you accepted responsibility, and you have continued to accept responsibility by paying out now hundreds of claims, but you won't pay out our claim. My claim is simple. You admit responsibility, you did not repair the dam, and you caused irreparable harm to my health. The health problems that I have suffered include an increase in my blood pressure. I am now on a second medication. That happened the week after the flood. I had many, many sleepless nights, and other members of my family suffered irreparable damage. One of my dogs had to be taken to the vet and also suffered some serious problems because he swam in that water. This has been a devastating experience, and I think it's made more devastating by the fact that you will not pay us. And now you're coming at us as taxpayers again, and you're saying, give us more money in the form of another tax bond. That is not going to happen. I will do everything that I can to fight you against this tax bond until you pay us the money that you should have been paying us a long time ago. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this time to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
The next person I have is Joan Rivas Cosby.
Ms. Cosby?
Good evening. My name is Joan Rivas Cosby. At the time of the flood, I have lived for almost 40 years in my house on South 19th Street. I've heard the pain, frustration, and emotion in my neighbors' voices as they speak tonight and as they did at the last board meeting on August 11th. Their stories bring back what I went through in the 2017 flood. Please let me tell you what it was like for me. Tuesday, February 21st started as a normal work day. When I started seeing messages on the Nextdoor website on rising water in Coyote Creek, I was concerned as I live only a few blocks from the creek, but I never expected the water to rise enough to endanger my property. Mid-afternoon, a friend alerted me to water approaching 19th Street from William Street and to get home fast. Frightened now, I rushed home, gathered my 2 cats and some belongings, but only minutes after I arrived, water had reached my yard, and when I was ready to leave, it was too deep to safely drive out, so I stayed. But all I could do was watch the water and hope it would stop rising. I thought my house was high enough to avoid flooding, but by about 5:50, my basement began to flood. Many household items and goods and items of sentimental value that I wanted or needed were stored there. With no clue of imminent flooding, I hadn't retrieved those prized mementos in advance, and by the time I knew it was real, it was too late to save anything in the basement. Around 7:45 or 8, water was spilling under the front door and rising from the basement. I called the San Jose Fire Department, and my cats and I were soon evacuated by boat. I remain grateful to this day for the kindness and professionalism shown by the firefighters. SJFD took us to a bus taking evacuees to a shelter. As my cats were in a pet carrier, I was told it would be fine to take them with me. Then a friend called and offered us refuge at his house. I learned later the shelter did not allow pets, a situation I was spared only by a friend's kindness and concern. The next day, I found the floodwater had ruined walls, floors, appliances, furniture, rugs, books, and everything else on or touching the floor. I was overwhelmed by the effect of the flood, not just the destruction of property, but the filth. And it wasn't just the house. The detached sunroom, garage, and tool shed were flooded, and many items in those outbuildings ruined as well. I was luckier than many, but not due to any planning or preparation from Valley Water. Remembering the despair that I felt during and right after the flood still brings me to tears. This horror was terrifying and preventable. Even telling myself to be grateful that I only lost property and my cats and I survived doesn't take away the memory of that horrible experience. I had a very comfortable life in my little house with a routine that provided order and comfort. My life was very unhappily disrupted due to the flooding of Coyote Creek, and now, 3.5 years later, still no remedy from Valley Water. Valley Water's inaction before and lack of accountability after has been profoundly disappointing to me and many others. I urge you to do what you can to restore your credibility in the community. One important step would be to do right by those who were harmed by the 2017 flood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cosby.
The next speaker is Yolanda Najar.
Ms. Yolanda Naja.
Hi, my name is Brianna Guevara. I'll be reading a statement for my grandmother, Yolanda Nahar. My name is Yolanda Nahar. My husband and I have lived at 341 South 20th Street in San Jose since 1974. We raised our sons and helped raise our grandchildren here. Before the 2017 flood, we felt lucky to live in such a nice neighborhood. But the flood ruined work tools, appliances, irreplaceable family treasures, such as my father's electric scooter and furniture. We lost lots of off-road motorcycles that the grandchildren adored. Many records and other documents were also completely destroyed. The flood caused us a lot of stress and discomfort, which all could have been prevented. Repair work for us was a nasty business. Open walls and flooring exposed to the ground brought in the stench of raw sewage. A layer of muck, reeking of sewage, stuck to bushes, plants, our patio, and outside furniture. We lived with these conditions for months. My husband developed asthma. Due to repairing our house, my husband was having to use a saw that ended up cutting his thigh open, causing him to need 29 stitches. Last year, you compensated 200 flood victims, which speaks volumes, yet no one in our neighborhood has been made whole. Why? We voted for your 2013 bond issue because we trusted your promise that it would help prevent future floods, but you didn't take timely and necessary actions to prevent the flood in 2017, and we still haven't been compensated. How can we support another bond measure so you can collect millions and millions of dollars from us taxpayers when we have yet to see a dime of compensation from you? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And the next speaker I have is Peter Miskin.
Mr. Peter Miskin.
Hello. Thank you, Madam Chairperson and members of the board for this opportunity. I've been on South 20th since 2008, and I was one of the victims of the flood night of 2017. My story is not very different from the stories that you already heard. And I'm here to ask you questions or to point few things to you. And that is, Water District repeatedly admitted responsibility for the flood. Almost a year ago, Water District compensated 200 other flood victims. So that must mean that you accept responsibility for the flood. My question is, why are we not being compensated 3.5 years later? We are owed compensation. Instead of that, You're coming to us to ask us to pay you in the form of a new bond. My neighbors and I voted for your bond issue in 2013 because we trusted you. However, our trust was misplaced. Again, you owe us a compensation. Instead, you're asking us to pay you. You're asking us to pay for your incompetence. That is not acceptable. That's immoral and absolutely unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miskin.
And the next speaker I have is Brendan Lavelle.
Brendan Burrell.
Hello.
Yes, please, Ms. Lavelle.
Thank you, Speaker and Board. And thank you to the other speakers and victims of the 2017 flood. Good evening. My name is Brendan Lavelle. I live on South 19th Street in the Olander neighborhood of San Jose. And my family and my property were directly impacted by the 2017 flood. My presence here tonight is to call you, the Water Board, to action, to acknowledge the preventable issues that emerged during the floods, to address in a real way the concerns of those victims who suffered both loss and anguish from these destructive floods and their aftermath. And in my opinion, most importantly, set in motion a plan to help mitigate future flood disasters. Flooding, like wildfires and pandemic disease, is a complicated problem, and no single agency bears complete culpability. However, the Water Board's inability or unwillingness to fix areas within its control, like the long-known concerns regarding Anderson Dam, or the grossly neglected maintenance of our creek system, especially Coyote Creek, does bear responsibility. When the 2017 floods occurred, these issues were not unknown. Your agency should not have been surprised. And promises to again fix these problems ring hollow, since voters have already spoken out and monies have already been allocated. As to the victims, with culpability comes accountability. I'm generally not a litigious person, and I do believe that property owners bear reasonable responsibility for certain uncontrollable matters affecting us. But I also firmly believe that our losses were heightened by your mismanagement and neglect. It's time to do the right thing. The finger pointing needs to stop. Take ownership and listen to the neighborhoods you serve, and then act, make them whole. To conclude, I do not have confidence that any of your words or limited actions since the flood have made my family safer when the next flood event occurs. Anderson Dam and its replacement clearly remains an issue. The clogged creeks and storm drains resemble the weeks and months leading up to February 2017. Especially now as new requests for funding loom, kicking the can down the road so the next board faces the same problem with the next flood is dangerous and unhelpful at best. You claim to have an open dialogue with these communities. Please listen, and please take the necessary and appropriate actions to mitigate the next disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lavelle.
The next speaker I have is Armando Lopez.
Mr. Lopez?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Okay, my name is Armando Lopez. I'm a resident of Rock Spring. I want to just share, thank you for letting me share my what I feel in that time. In February 2017, I was shocked because I received a call that was telling me that my house was flooded. The stress of to see the water coming to the neighbor, it was, unbelievable. The stress, the most stress I have because my daughter lost all her medicine for lupus. That was devastating me at that time because I was just thinking what I'm gonna do, where we're gonna stay, where we're gonna rehome in my family, myself, and financial burden and burst and emotion of having to throw my belongings away because we ended up throwing everything. And I was like just thinking myself, if the water dam issue would have been fixed years ago, like it was promised, then my family and I would not be worried every time it rains. I just have 3 questions. First question is I would like to know where do my taxes go. I'm a hard-working member for this society, and I pay my taxes every year, and I think I expect them to be treated equally. Number 2, does this board measure deserve my vote? When you brought the bond years ago, you promised flood control. Credibility is not very promising, and we understand. You're going to ask for money from our taxpayers. And number 3, when are you going to settle our cases so that we can all go on with our lives? That's all I can share, but it's in that time it is still it's emotionally is very devastating. We really believe that all this is gonna be end soon, and I appreciate you letting me share my story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez.
And the last person I have with a hand raised is Reverend Moore.
Reverend Moore. Reverend Moore.
Yes, thank you, Board. Thank you so much for allowing me this time. They say that the difference between the rich and the working class is that the working class do everything with their own hands, and the rich hire hands to do things. This has affected the working class community greatly. They've been moved. They've lost everything. They've lost momentums that you can never replace. Photos of babies being born, photos of grandparents and great-grandparents have been washed away and damaged and destroyed. For 3 years, they have suffered underneath a leadership on the national level that has not cared for them. And now we get to the 2020 year, and we have this COVID-19, we have the fires, we have all this coming down to us, and we're still coming to the board, to the water district, to get right, to get made whole. We want to be made whole in this community. They say that if you want to know a company's true character, observe how it treats those who don't matter. And currently, the way you are treating the Rock Springs neighborhood, that in part of our community, is not fairly. 3 years is more than enough time to settle this claim. More than enough time has been passed by to make them whole. I once had a church, and the church had a sewage backup, and it came all the way up the walls, and we had to throw away momentums, historical facts that were part of the history of the church family. That hurt and cannot be replaced. But what you can do today is take the time to pay the people as we go through this terrible year of 2020, COVID-19, and the fires. Be some sunshine in a dark moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Moore.
I do have 5 more hands raised. I have an Ann Rosenzweig.
Miss Ann Rosenzweig.
My name is Ann Rosenzweig. I'm a retired attorney who has lived in Morgan Hill for more than 40 years. I am not a flood victim, but since I speak fluent Spanish, I volunteered to interview Spanish-speaking flood victims at Sacred Heart to help them file claims for their losses. It was disturbing to hear these flood victims recount what had happened to them and to help them list the belongings they had lost. To hear them explain how disruptive it had been not only to lose the roof over their heads, but in some cases, the use of their car. Flood victims worried about the impact of the flood on the elderly, infirm parents and on their frightened children. I was shocked to learn that some of these flood victims still have not received compensation for their losses more than 3 years after the flood. I urge you to correct and rectify this as soon as possible, especially if you now wish the community's support for a new bond measure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a person, I'm not sure what the name is, but they're identified by the number 14089.
Okay, 14089.
Correct.
Okay. And you're
unmuted.
You're on. Please go ahead.
Okay. We'll move to the next one and I can go back to them.
Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Hello.
She is. Maybe it's her. Go ahead. Go ahead, you're unmuted.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you. I'll begin by saying an ounce of prevention is always better than what it takes to fix something that's broken, if it can even be fixed. And when it's not just property, but trust that's broken, the work is that much harder. I was 67 when the flood hit in 2017, and I can tell you that the prospect of starting all over again was a daunting one. I've worked all my life, I pay taxes, and I vote. The psychological turmoil and the inconvenience were incomprehensible. I suffered from despondency, the desire to be isolated, fear and dread that every phone call would be another situation I could not handle. I lost the contents of my apartment and the possessions of my family, including family heirlooms and irreplaceable keepsakes of my children. When allowed to return after the flood, I found many things not washed away by filthy flood water were stolen. Things like jewelry, foreign currency, computers, cable equipment, and this even though the San Jose Police Department was said to be guarding the area 24/7. And not only were we displaced, there were promises broken by the city of San Jose concerning the resettling of displaced families. But what's even more unsettling to me and to so many other flood survivors is the fact that the 2017 flooding was preventable. When the Army Corps of Engineers did a risk assessment and subsequently refused to pay for a berm to keep floodwaters out of Rock Spring after the 1997 floods because it didn't pass a so-called cost-benefit test, that's code for saying that the homes of working families in Rock Spring aren't worth protecting from floods the way homes of wealthy Westsiders are. And since the Water District has millions and millions in unrestricted reserves all this time, why didn't the Water District pay for the necessary remediation and protect us from future floods? In other words, we are expendable. This is absurd and blatant discrimination. For me, this is a matter of honesty and integrity. The Water District, along with the city of San Jose, was complicit in causing irreparable damage to the lives and livelihoods of many, and it goes on. And while you have put into place some reforms, that does nothing to address the past losses we've suffered. With one decision, the Water District endangered our lives, displaced us, caused financial loss and emotional turmoil, and endangered our health as many experienced rashes, respiratory issues, heart problems, and the loss of pets from the dirty water that was never tested by the Water District. Why are you asking us to support a new parcel tax when the previous one was not used to prevent this disaster? And this bond also has a sunset clause, which means you can repeat the same folly. Will I support another bond measure? Emphatically no, unless some action is taken on this item. We are taxpayers. We are paying Water District salaries and the salaries of those lawyers who are dragging their posteriors in this matter. Part of our recovery is closure. We are waiting on you. What are you waiting for? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please identify your name and address?
Yes, thank you. I'm Juanita Wilson, and my address, I have a new address and I had to relocate. My address now is 3027 David Avenue, Apartment 2, San Jose, 95128.
Okay, thank you.
The next participant I have is just identified by K51. I apologize, I tried to get the name, but so I'm going to unmute
Okay.
the participant.
Yeah. K51. I think you're unmuted. You can start talking.
Okay. We can move on. I can go back to that participant.
Hello?
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. You're on. Please first state your name and then please provide your comment.
I'm Ray Fiddler, Raymond Fiddler. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
You know, I'm a Native American from the Lakota Nation. And this is 1825. This country's been breaking treaties with the people. 1825. We're in 2020. I'm an enrolled member of the Spanish River, Sioux, and Standing Rock tribes. When the Dakota Access Pipeline was put through, it violated the same treaty, the Laramie Treaty, signed way over 100 years ago. Some people think, well, that happened so long ago, it doesn't apply today. What's the difference? I remember this history when I think about how you have not kept your promises. Anyone with their hands on a commodity, oil, water, food, and there's a few people, and for the masses, they don't keep their promises. The residents of East San Jose, our people, my neighborhood, you know, the Silicon Valley, have always treated the water supply that was available to us with respect. We don't waste it, we don't pollute it, hoard it. And when your flood control measures have been on the ballot that we have voted for in 2013 in favor, we urge our neighbors to do the same, to make your life easier. But after years of good faith and trust, our part is turned, on our part, you turn your back on us, another broken treaty. 2017. Think about that. You're a part of history right now that have, again, turned your back on the people. After years of good trust and all that, it means nothing to you when I watch you guys. I haven't heard a word of how are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? And there's another, there's word that attorneys have filed suit that, filed papers to defendants. You guys have filed their papers that have, in court that will absolve you from any of this, make it a law. Because you're national, you're failures. You know, I've been misplaced. I've been misplaced because of that. I have not had a home. I've been bitten by a spider that almost cost my life. And now I'm living in the mountains and hearing my voice. That's from sitting in and fighting forest fires. And I had a good life. I had friends. I had pets that are gone now. And I just want you to make us whole. And when? That's what I like to hear. I'd like to see some paperwork on when. Litigation laws that need to be changed for sure. Because this defendants are getting away with. And look at DuPont. What happened with DuPont and PFOS? I know you guys know about that. And PFAS. I read it in your report. The parts per million that are poisoning people all over the world. I'm not going to say please. I'm not going to say thank you. Fix it. Thank you. Well, I didn't say thank you. Please get it fixed.
Thank you.
You can cut me off now.
Have one more participant. Hong Mei.
Hong Mei?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you for give me my opportunity to speak up. So my name is Hong Mai. I work for the City of San Jose Library as a page. At the time of the 2017 flood, I had been living in the South Bay Mobile Home Park at 1350 Oakland Road for almost 30 years. I had never been through anything like that. What happened to me on February 21st, 2017, when I tried to go home after work. This flood was much worse than 1997 flood and affected me a lot. The policeman was shouting at me and would not let me in to my mobile home park when I tried to get home after work. At last, they gave me half hour to take some important things. So I just have a time to get my own document and some medication only. So the next day I came back. I was shocked because everything is on the water. Even my house, because close to the river, so the water was almost go to the floor. I could not say anything because I never been that happened to me all my life. Until now, I'm still scared by heavy rain and water. And even wherever I see the policeman, it brings back me the memory of the police shouting, "Go, go, go!" beside my Mayday Adams, my personal home. So we don't have enough space to live, to put all the things in the home. So we all put all of them in the storage, outside in the backyard. So I was evacuated for 2 weeks. I must go to my brother's house and beg him let me get in because I don't have a chance to rent a hotel to stay for the 2 weeks because I just work part-time in the library only. So 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, I went home. So everything in the storage. So beside maybe personal property that I lost, I also lost the confidence in the water district for 2 reasons. First, I should have been protected from the flood, but we were not. Second, to compensate a lot of Vietnamese flood victims last year. So my neighbors and I thought you were finally accepting responsibility for what happened. But instead, we still wait and wait. And are made to feel like a beggar when we did nothing wrong. I hope you will do better in the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Mai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no more participants this time.
Okay. I first of all I want to thank everybody to spend the time and then share your very personal story with this board. Believe me that we understand your pain and frustration. Resulting from this floods. I want to assure you that we are working very diligently in settlement to compensate you for the appropriate amount for your damages. I like to request staff to prepare a response outlining the timeline for everyone who came to this board. I don't think, I heard many people said that they have never heard anything from the water district. I don't think anybody should be kept in the dark. I know that there are unknowns at this point where our staff is working very diligently on resolving issues. However, letting people know that this is where we are. This is the approximate timeline. I think it's something that we should be doing. So I'm making that request to staff to do that. Not only to the people that came to the board meeting today, but also quite a few flood victims appeared at our past board meeting. So just a status report will be good for everybody. So does board member have a comment related to this? Okay, no. Then we will move on to item 2.6, recognition of outgoing youth commission members. This is Michelle.